In this third video, we'll continue looking at some of the economic ramifications of the Reagan years, the efforts at deregulation and how it affected government policy, and also look at some of the social implications, some of the social policies that Reagan was implementing. Despite the overall economic growth, wealth increasingly became consolidated during the Reagan years, which Democrats had argued proved that the prosperity was not real and that it wasn't trickling down. While there was aggregate economic growth, increasingly a two-tier society emerged. More and more wealthy people and more poor people in the Reagan years. Here you can see in the bottom right persons living in poverty by race and by the poverty rate. Reagan cut funding for welfare programs that many conservatives argued created dependency on the government and eroded the American family. There was the mythology of the welfare queen driving a Cadillac and living off government largesse. A problem for Reagan was a tremendous shortfall in the Social Security Trust Fund. That was the money that the government collected to pay off what was needed for Social Security. And facing this large shortfall, Reagan appointed a blue ribbon panel, the Greenspan Commission, led by Alan Greenspan, to study the issue and make some recommendations. The result was compromise legislation that increased Social Security's long-term solvency by, among other provisions, taxing recipients' benefits and extending the age requirements. Many liberals protested that these costs were paid for by poor people who relied more heavily on those benefits. As part of his deregulatory efforts, Reagan dismissed the importance of environmental protection. He's installed Ann Gorsuch, who had virtually no experience in the environmental field, as the Environmental Protection Agency administrator. She, by the way, is the mother of our present Supreme Court Justice. She loosened enforcement of environmental regulations and helped cut EPA's budget. Its staff was cut by almost a third, and all of this, Reagan argued, this deregulation would unleash a stronger economy. Reagan's Secretary of Interior was a man named James Watt, and he really worked to increase mining and drilling on federal lands and embraced what became known as the Sagebrush Rebellion in the West, an idea to take federal lands and turn them over to the state and local governments. And of course, conservationists and environmentalists argued that this would remove a lot of protections for those lands. In regard to civil rights, the Reagan administration worked to weaken programs designed to support minorities, claiming that they encouraged reverse discrimination, and they actively attacked the concept of affirmative action. Interpreting civil rights laws narrowly, Reagan maintained the government had overstepped its responsibilities. Here you can see Reagan standing next to Jesse Jackson, who had gone to the Middle East to help free an African-American U.S. fighter pilot, shown standing next to Reagan. Previously, Reagan had not been that moralistic or religious. He had not attended church regularly, but once president, he really appealed directly to the religious right constituency, and he spoke often of God and Christian morality. Here you can see a quote: "The struggle now going on for the world will never be decided by bombs or rockets, by armies or military might. The real crisis we face today is a spiritual one at root. It is a test of moral will and faith." And so, those type of things were music to the ears of religious and fundamentalist conservatives. While Reagan administration really didn't do much to prohibit abortion, he still strongly spoke out against it. And for the first time, what they called themselves the pro-life movement, they had a presidential champion. And so again, the religious conservatives loved Reagan. With crack cocaine sweeping across America in the 1980s and other drug use increasing, the Reagan administration launched what they called a war on drugs. They dramatically increased the punishment for drug use and selling. They called zero tolerance. You know, 3 strikes and you're out. And here on the graph on the left, you can see the incarceration rates in America shot up during the Reagan years. For her part, First Lady Nancy Reagan began a program called Just Say No. It was aimed at young people, helping them to resist the peer pressure to use drugs. By the end of his first term, Reagan's domestic policies had generated pretty harsh pushback, and in some ways, Reagan began to retreat. After first resisting signing legislation to create a national holiday honoring Martin Luther King, he finally agreed to do so. And you can see him signing it on the bottom left with Coretta Scott King standing next to him. After Ann Gorsuch was embroiled in scandal, he replaced her as EPA administrator with William Ruckelshaus, shown here. Ruckelshaus was a Republican moderate who had advocated environmental protection and served as Nixon's first EPA head. Reagan also removed the scandal-laden James Watt at the Department of Interior. Despite the controversies and disagreements, Reagan remained personally popular with most Americans throughout his first term. The nation really rallied around him when in late March 1981, a mentally disturbed gunman named John Hinckley tried to impress the actress Jodie Foster by trying to assassinate Reagan. He shot him as he was leaving the Washington Hilton after Reagan had given a speech. Reagan was shot and shoved into the back of the waiting limousine and rushed to the hospital. And when he got there, he didn't really realize how dangerous his wound was. And he got out and he walked in waving to the crowd. And once in the emergency room, he joked with a surgeon that he hoped the doctor was a Republican. The bullet was in Reagan's lung, and he was in grave danger. But it just all seemed that he was, kind of handled it studily, handled it with grace, and the public admired that. In any event, this concludes the video on deregulation, some of Reagan's social policies.